very, very proud to cast a Latino actress as Snow White. It makes no sense to me. You're progressive in one way, but you're still making that backward story of 7 dwarves living in a cave. What the are you doing, man?
This would have been a lot better if they, had a strong male along with her, a prince, if it wasn't about socialism, if they didn't remove the dwarves, if they had real dwarves.
Rachel Zegler's Snow White remake has been plagued by backlash, but now, shocking reports claim she's pointing fingers at Peter Dinklage for making things worse. Did his early criticism doom the film from the start? This new angle has sparked fresh debates, infusing even more intrigue into a saga that was already overflowing with speculation. How did it all come to this? What part might Peter Dinklage have played? And why would Rachel Zegler's frustrations be aimed at him? And perhaps most compelling of all, does this blame game hint at a deeper rift within Hollywood's attempts to modernize beloved fairy tales? In the months before the film's release, the project was defined by one controversy after another. Disney had promoted its intention to reimagine the classic Snow White for a new generation, pledging to address what it deemed outdated elements in the original 1937 animated masterpiece. At first, fans were curious to see how the studio would approach the modernization of a tale so deeply rooted in the cultural consciousness. Rachel Zegler was chosen as Snow White, a casting decision that sparked both praise and backlash. Some fans celebrated the decision as a way to bring greater diversity to the iconic role, while others grew uneasy about how much Disney would stray from the original. Then Peter Dinklage joined the conversation, expressing his reservations about depicting the 7 dwarfs in a potentially reductive manner. Dinklage's remarks resonated with many who believed Hollywood should be more mindful in how it portrays certain characters, particularly those historically reduced to stereotypes. But these remarks also touched a nerve at Disney. Suddenly, the studio was torn between preserving a cherished story and avoiding the reinforcement of outdated stereotypes. The debate exploded across social media, dividing fans into camps. Some praised Dinklage for raising concerns, while others countered that such critiques went too far, arguing that a carefully handled adaptation could keep the tale's magic intact without causing offense. At the time, Rachel Zegler stayed mostly quiet on the issue, leaving many to speculate she was either unfazed by the debate or possibly restricted by studio agreements from speaking out. As production progressed, whispers emerged about screenplay changes. Industry sources claimed the team was rushing to modify the narrative amid the backlash, with the creative staff divided over whether to keep or remove the dwarfs entirely. Additional reports indicated that some script changes resulted directly from studio anxiety over Dinklage's remark. Zegler, meanwhile, reportedly found herself trapped in the crossfire, grappling with a narrative that kept evolving unexpectedly. As filming neared its end, rumors surfaced of choppy editing and a muddled plot. Early test screenings met with tepid responses at best, with viewers allegedly criticizing the film for its uneven tone. Audiences noted how some moments seemed to push modern themes in ways that came across as heavy-handed rather than natural. For a beloved fairy tale like Snow White, this became a serious issue. Behind the scenes, insiders hinted at growing tensions within the creative team. Some advocated for a faithful adaptation, while others demanded radical revisions to align with current sensibilities. Rachel Zegler's name kept appearing in these debates since she was the project's public figure. Every success or criticism started flowing straight to her. Then came the pivotal moment when internet chatter began suggesting Zegler was dissatisfied. Some claimed she was venting her frustration. Others insisted she was trying to contain the fallout. Conflicting narratives piled up. Another strange claim suggested that there was potential legal trouble involving Zegler, sparked by an alleged conflict on set. While no solid evidence ever emerged to support that story, the rumor mill spun ceaselessly, harming the production's reputation further. Disney attempted to pivot and rescue the film's image, but it appeared every move only ignited new criticisms. Fans who usually defend Disney's live-action approach started calling this particular adaptation a misstep too far, and critics seized on the fiasco as an example of what happens when modernization is clumsily executed. The film stumbled closer to its theatrical release date, clouded by the swirling negativity. And all the while, Peter Dinklage's initial remarks lingered in the background of the conversation, still shaping public perception of the film's potential. Some expressed gratitude that Dinklage had highlighted the dwarf's portrayal, arguing that such a large company should be held to strict standards of inclusivity. Others accused him of worsening an already delicate balancing act. It implied that his concerns prompted creative choices that ultimately hurt the project's cohesion. Rachel Zegler, for her part, faced no shortage of detractors. As the lead, she was inevitably criticized by those who felt she was out of her depth or had not done enough to guide the story towards steadier ground. The phrase "Snow White disaster" became a catch-all for the production's issues. From the bad press to the underwhelming test screenings and beyond, once that label took hold, it was nearly impossible to shake. Headlines declared that Disney's new Snow White was cursed, that the production was riddled with tension, and that the beloved fairy tale had been tarnished by too much awkward tampering. Zegler's every public appearance or social media post was dissected for hints about whether she acknowledged the backlash or planned to defend the film. Fans online divided into passionate factions. Some insisted it was all a miscommunication, that the film would turn out fine, while others braced for a letdown they believed was unavoidable. In the midst of these swirling emotions, speculation about how Disney might separate itself from the fiasco began brewing. Some fans suggested that the studio might fast-track a new adaptation, one that would effectively replace the troubled version. Rumors emerged of a second Snow White adaptation with a different cast, new director, and a completely fresh creative approach. That was when Jenna Ortega's name started trending as a fan-favorite choice. People imagined how an actress with her proven versatility, comedic skill, and emotional depth might handle the iconic role, especially if the script aligned with modern taste in a less forced way. The idea of Ortega possibly stepping in for a reimagined Snow White excited the fandom, but all these rumors surfaced amid a flood of negative press surrounding the Zegler production. At that point, the situation took a surprising turn. Unverified sources began alleging that Rachel Zegler privately held Peter Dinklage responsible for much of the fiasco. According to these whispers, Zegler believed that the criticism and subsequent rewrites were directly linked to Dinklage's initial comments about how the dwarfs might be portrayed in the movie. She reportedly confided in close friends that the production had drastically changed key elements following the public outcry, which not only muddled the film's tone but also made her performance seem disjointed. Whether or not this blame was fair, the notion took on a life of its own in online discussions. Some in Zegler's camp argued that her frustration was justified, given that the conversation about dwarfs had expanded into a broader condemnation of the entire film's approach. They claimed the negative attention overshadowed her work and the rest of the cast's efforts, unfairly branding the movie as flawed before it could even properly respond. Others countered that it was more than just the dwarfs' depiction that disappointed test audiences, pointing to problems like jarring tonal shifts, an overuse of heavy-handed messages, and a lost sense of the original fairy tale's charm. These critics argued that Dinklage's statements were merely a spark and not the main cause of the film's collapse. Yet the mere rumor that Zegler herself saw him as a primary factor fueled a fresh wave of debate. Industry insiders, when pressed for answers, mostly dismissed the gossip. They hinted that while tensions were high, it was overly simplistic to pin blame on any single person. Nonetheless, the narrative of Zegler versus Dinklage kept gaining momentum. People online observed that Dinklage had a strong reputation for challenging Hollywood norms, citing his outspokenness on various issues. If he had stirred controversy, it would not be unusual for him to do so on a matter this sensitive. And if the creative team overreacted in response, it could easily have spiraled into a fiasco that eclipsed the movie's other aspects. In that sense, the rumor that Zegler blamed him didn't seem far-fetched to those following the saga closely. When the film finally reached audiences, it arrived burdened by all that negativity. Reviews ranged from tepid to brutal, often citing the same flaws that had been flagged in test screenings. The story felt fragmented. Attempts to modernize certain elements clashed with scenes that leaned heavily on nostalgia. Some believed the portrayal of the dwarfs had been rendered almost unrecognizable in the final cut, as though the filmmakers were unsure whether to feature them, reduce them, or redefine them entirely. Zegler's performance drew both admiration and critique, with some praising her for giving her all despite the messy script, and others claiming she had been miscast from the beginning. Peter Dinklage was notably silent during this period, at least publicly. One side effect of his quietness was a surge of speculation that he was deliberately distancing himself from the production, either out of respect for the cast or because he felt the final product had mishandled his concerns. Meanwhile, Zegler continued to face online scrutiny as rumors of her private frustration spread. Fans and critics parsed every interview or social media post, searching for veiled references to Dinklage. Was she deflecting blame or simply lamenting that the production never found its footing despite all the chaos? The film's release came and went, sparking a burst of social media buzz, but failing to achieve the critical or box office success Disney had surely wanted. In Hollywood, word of the fiasco circulated, reinforcing the idea that the production process had been derailed by too many voices, pulling the story in opposing directions. Some analysts contended that the fiasco could ultimately have been avoided if the filmmakers had taken a more careful approach, perhaps by balancing an authentic retelling of Snow White with thoughtful and respectful updates. Instead, it seemed that once Peter Dinklage's commentary went viral, the studio scrambled to prove it was progressive. That panic, according to these observers, became the project's downfall. Not long after the film's disappointing reception, reports surfaced that Disney was indeed considering a second attempt at Snow White, in a move that mirrored their approach to certain other franchises. The studio might have been seeking a reset. New writers, new director, new star. Jenna Ortega's name resurfaced, reigniting interest in how a reimagined Snow White might fare. By this time, many fans were disillusioned. They wondered whether Disney's relentless push to remake classics was doing more damage than good. Others clung to hope, believing that a well-balanced adaptation could still deliver a magical experience for modern audiences. Zegler was not the only one facing public doubt. The fiasco had cast suspicion on the studio's entire live-action strategy. But in certain corners of the internet, the discussion about how Rachel Zegler felt regarding Peter Dinklage's role in this mess refused to fade. The rumor gained steam that Zegler had vented to friends about the unfair pressure Dinklage's remarks placed on her. She was supposedly upset not just by the sudden storyline changes, but also by how these controversies had made her the public scapegoat of a project being attacked from all sides. While no concrete audio or video proof of such statements surfaced, the narrative was gripping enough to resonate with fans who had seen how the original Dwarfs debate overshadowed much of the production process. By this point, some fans tried to shift responsibility in the opposite direction. They noted that an actress of Zegler's talent and visibility could have spoken up sooner about the story's direction if she was truly unhappy. They reasoned that Dinklage's remarks, while bold, were hardly the sole reason for the film's alleged failures. There were, after all, volumes of critiques about pacing, characterization, thematic clutter, and heavy-handed messaging that had little to do with how dwarfs were depicted. Nonetheless, Zegler's alleged belief that Dinklage's criticisms sent the production into turmoil became a focal point that eclipsed these other issues for some observers who preferred a straightforward explanation for how it all unraveled. Through it all, Disney remained silent about any internal conflicts or alleged blame games. The company stuck to its usual approach of letting the public discourse burn out, hoping that new projects and announcements would soon shift the audience's focus. In time, the so-called Snow White disaster might be reduced to a cautionary tale in Hollywood's ongoing saga about remaking classic film. But the persistent rumor that Rachel Zegler pointed a finger directly at Peter Dinklage ensured that this particular fiasco would occupy a unique place in the public imagination. It wasn't just a story of another lackluster remake. It was a story of creative and personal conflict in a major studio production. Journalists who tried to get Zegler or Dinklage to address the rumor met with silence or polite evasion. Perhaps both stars saw no upside in fueling further controversy. From a strategic standpoint, Dinklage's supporters argued that he had only done what many had applauded him for in the past, speaking truth to power about representation in Hollywood. From Zegler's perspective, if indeed she held him accountable for triggering a wave of studio chaos, it might be a sentiment better shared privately than in headline. Any public rebuke of his commentary would likely ignite more debates about sensitivity and storytelling and place her in an even more difficult spotlight. As the dust settled and the film faded from daily headlines, the story of how it went wrong lived on in message boards, fan forums, and casual discussions among film lovers. The fiasco's various angles, modernizing a classic fairy tale, balancing inclusivity with tradition. The clash between creative visions reflected broader tensions in Hollywood's changing landscape. The alleged rift between Rachel Zegler and Peter Dinklage became symbolic of the pitfalls that arise when a beloved story is retold in an era where every detail can trigger debate. But even those who defended the film's intentions admitted that the execution had faltered, stifled by too many voices in the kitchen and too many concerns about public reception. In the following months, as other Disney projects debuted in theaters or on streaming, comparisons to Snow White were inevitable. Articles referenced the fiasco whenever discussing how the studio might approach future remakes. Social media chatter used the film as a benchmark for potential failures or successes. If a new film managed to blend modern elements without losing its fairy tale magic, people would say they learned from the Snow White disaster. If a film faltered, critics would joke, "Here we go again, another fiasco in the making." The shadow of that troubled production loomed large, and for Rachel Zegler, it became an unavoidable chapter of her early career. For Peter Dinklage, it reaffirmed his role as a leading voice in representation, but also showed how quickly commentary can snowball into large-scale backlash. Adding another layer to this unfolding drama were whispers that Disney insiders found themselves conflicted over whether to keep supporting the film or concede defeat and quietly move on. Some suggested that the studio's marketing team made a half-hearted effort to reframe the narrative by emphasizing the film's attempts at inclusivity and empowerment. But the damage was already done. Calling it a disaster had become an almost automatic response in many media circles. The rebranding or backtracking efforts, if they existed behind the scenes, failed to sway critics and audiences who had already formed strong opinions based on test screening leaks, early details, and the whirlwind of controversies. For fans of Rachel Zegler, the idea that she singled out Peter Dinklage as a key instigator of the fiasco was both fascinating and concerning. On one hand, they understood her desire to pinpoint a cause. On the other, they acknowledged that the production's troubles likely ran deeper than any one person's statements. There were script problems, tone problems, and a fundamental uncertainty about how to update Snow White without alienating its nostalgic fanbase. It was easy to see how blaming Dinklage might come across as oversimplifying a much more complicated situation. Still, the rumor endured, partly because it fit a broader pattern in Hollywood. When high-profile projects collapse under public scrutiny, the blame game is rarely absent. It's possible that Zegler felt like a target. She was new enough to the Hollywood spotlight that she might have been unprepared for the scale of backlash. Assigning some blame to Dinklage might have seemed like a natural, emotional reaction, even if it was never her official position. The internet, always eager for sensational revelations, seized on the angle instantly, weaving it into the ongoing saga of a film that just couldn't catch a break. Meanwhile, Peter Dinklage focused on other projects, occasionally giving interviews about upcoming roles or reflecting on his storied career. If interviewers asked about Snow White, he either avoided the question or offered a careful statement about the importance of nuance in storytelling. He had no reason to revive a controversy. Whether he even knew about Zegler's rumored frustration was unclear. Some guessed that he might have heard but chose not to engage. Others suspected the rumor never reached him because it was drowned out by the broader drama of the film's poor reception. The fiasco also revived debates about the future of Disney's live-action strategy. For years, the studio had relied heavily on nostalgia, remaking animated classics with big-name stars and glossy effects. Some of these remakes succeeded commercially, even if they drew mixed reviews. Others were called uninspired or forgettable. Snow White, however, was different. It was Disney's first animated feature back in 1937, a cornerstone of the studio's legacy. Tampering with that history introduced challenges that perhaps no marketing campaign or star power could easily overcome. If Peter Dinklage's critique forced the studio to rush, and if that rush weakened the film's narrative, it underscored just how delicate the process of modernizing beloved classics could be. When fans debated the fiasco online, they often discussed the validity of Dinklage's initial concerns. Some applauded him for highlighting an issue that might have otherwise been ignored. Others contended that Disney should have anticipated these critiques and prepared a thoughtful response rather than making hasty mid-production adjustments. For Zegler's defenders, her alleged blame of Dinklage was either dismissed as hearsay or reframed as a natural result of the production's meltdown. And while Zegler never publicly confirmed she made such accusations, the mere possibility kept tabloids and social media buzzing for months. In reflecting on the fiasco, it's important to remember that multiple factors contributed to the final outcome. Tensions over rewriting fairy tale tropes, disagreements about tone, a frantic effort to please modern sensibilities without abandoning tradition, and the usual high-pressure environment of a major studio release all played a role. The rumored clash between Zegler and Dinklage, whether real or exaggerated, became a focal point that highlighted the film's deepest flaws. It lacked a clear vision, and it couldn't smoothly reconcile the old and the new. Instead, it veered between attempts to honor the original and clumsy stabs at contemporary relevance. In time, the fiasco may be remembered as a lesson for studios to plan more carefully when updating iconic stories. The controversy might also serve as a warning to actors that external commentary can reshape an entire production for better or worse. If the rumors are true, Rachel Zegler herself learned this lesson the hard way. And if the rumors are not true, it shows just how powerful online chatter can be in shaping perceptions of behind-the-scenes drama. Either way, the idea that Zegler singled out Dinklage for blame added another dimension to an already complex story, one that mixed cultural debate, creative disputes, and personal frustrations into a cautionary tale about how not to remake a classic. As the entertainment industry evolves, new controversies will arise, and old ones will fade. Yet the Snow White disaster has cemented itself as a key reference point in discussions about Disney's live-action strategy and the challenges of modernizing vintage tales. If Jenna Ortega or any other star steps into the role of Snow White soon, they will do so under the shadow of the fiasco and likely under intense scrutiny from fans wary of another botched remake. The rumored blame Rachel Zegler placed on Peter Dinklage, whether justified or not, will remain an anecdote in Hollywood's collective memory, symbolizing the fine line between progressive adaptation and misguided execution. The conversation, then, is bigger than just two high-profile actors. It speaks to the tension between legacy and modern values, between audience expectations and corporate strategy, between an actor's performance and the external noise that can derail it. Snow White, as a cultural touchstone, deserved a careful, thoughtful update for a new generation. Instead, it became entangled in controversy, resulting in a film that many found disappointing and a wave of rumors assigning blame in all directions. Rachel Zegler's alleged frustration toward Peter Dinklage simply embodies the tensions that emerge when creative visions collide with public discourse, leaving everyone to wonder, how different might things have been if the film had begun with a unified vision and open dialogue about sensitive topics? For now, there is no easy answer. Disney has presumably learned from the fiasco, though only future projects will show whether those lessons lead to smoother productions. Rachel Zegler has moved on to other roles, working to build a career unshadowed by the ghost of a film burdened with near-mythic negativity. Peter Dinklage continues advocating for nuanced portrayals in Hollywood, secure in his reputation as an actor, unafraid to speak his mind. And the rest of us are left to piece together how such a high-profile adaptation went so wrong. The rumor that Zegler blames Dinklage for the catastrophe is just one part of that puzzle, intriguing, plausible, yet unconfirmed, reflecting a production that lost its way amid competing priorities and public pressure. In the end, the Snow White disaster stands as a reminder that no amount of brand recognition or nostalgic goodwill can guarantee a film's success. When a story is as iconic as Snow White, any misstep is magnified 1,000-fold. The fiasco, laden with accusations, alleged blame, and frantic attempts to modernize, underscores the importance of having a clear vision from the start tone that respects both the source material and the contemporary audiences who will ultimately judge the film's fate. Whether Rachel Zegler truly blames Peter Dinklage or not, the episode highlights the complexity of creative collaboration in an era where even one person's public remarks can ripple through an entire studio system. It also shows how the best intentions can still produce a troubled final product, if not managed with clarity and unity from beginning to end.